No kidding. So you've fallen prey to, the standard Buddhist vice of compulsive gardening, have you?
I don't know how standard it is, but yeah, we're in the process of creating a native garden. So
Oh, so
yeah.
what, using indigenous plants only? One of my first two professors of Buddhism, his monastic training was in Japan, and he complained that the Grand Master of his temple was obsessed with gardening and kind of didn't give a damn about the monastic discipline or other issues that were outstanding. By contrast,
Uh,
yeah.
I was hoping that I'd be able to handle both fronts simultaneously.
Well, the universities in Taiwan also, a lot of them paid a lot more attention to gardening than to educational content. Some universities there with beautiful views and beautiful gardens, but not a lot under the surface. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I'm not sure if you reached me via the right email.
Yeah. So maybe that was part of the problem.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so I haven't received anything from you actually, but
Oh.
no worries because I've already looked you up, kind
Okay.
of, and yeah, and saw the impressive list of publications. So as you have stated,
Okay. I sent
uh,
I sent Nadia my resume also. I sent Nadia the resume and said, "Can you make sure that William Chu gets this?"
I
So
see.
yeah,
Okay.
she has a copy of it by email.
Once again, I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. I think my primary concern is, if I may, if you will pardon my being very blunt, is what the heck are you doing applying for our program if you are already so
Yeah,
advanced
I
in
know.
your study? You know,
Well,
I seriously doubt, yeah, that you'd be able to find the thing that you were looking for in our very humble place.
yeah. Well, I agree. And, coming to your university, it's humbler than I was expecting. I mean, I had low expectations, and the reality is
Right,
even
right.
lower.
Yeah.
I've visited many of the Buddhist universities in Taiwan, and
Mhm.
they're humble in their way, but I was expecting it to be more on that level, and it's really not. The other reality is, which is not in my resume, I have a 5-year-old daughter. My daughter
Uh,
lives in France. I fly back and forth to see her in France, which is not
uh,
cheap. I mean, in some ways, I have actually been a paragon of the Buddhist virtue of not caring about material possessions. I've never owned a car. I didn't own a cell phone until I was 36. I lived quite a simple life, but ultimately, I do need to earn money, so the
yeah, yeah,
value of the education and those kinds of outcomes, matters
yeah.
also. I don't know if anyone's indifferent to that stuff, but ultimately I can't be.
Well, and
Yep.
I'm sure you know this very, very well, but in order to find gainful employment in our very narrow field, you're going to have to graduate from a pedigree school rather than
Right.
a place as obscure as ours.
Well, I
And
don't. Yeah, I don't think that kind of employment is really open to me. But the other huge consideration here is just that I'm a Canadian citizen. So for better and for worse, as a Canadian citizen, I have radically fewer opportunities. It's also true that I have radically less competition, within Canada and so on. So in terms of what my options and opportunities are, they're really changed by being Canadian. And for me, quite a long time ago, I gave up on probably the career path you're alluding to, which would be go to an Ivy League school, so or Cambridge or Oxford in England, and get a PhD out of there, and then pursue that. And I just mentioned, apart from the fact that I have known people as friends who took that path, also my ex-wife, the mother of my daughter, who's already been mentioned, she got her PhD from Cambridge University. So I spent time at Cambridge and Oxford. I was married to her for 6 years. wasn't a short term relationship, And so I knew her and her situation and all of her friends. Just last night, I had dinner with a woman who got a PhD from one of the major universities here and is now kind of permanently unemployed or semi unemployed. I've known a lot of people who took that path, so it's not something that's really glorified for me. So, on the one hand, there's the question of, pursuing the education as an end in itself, or as an adjunct to what might otherwise be a meaningful life. Right now, so again, I mentioned this because you'd never guess this from my resume. I'm enrolled to begin a baking college. Baking college is only a 4-month program, so that I will be a qualified baker and I can earn a living baking bread.
That's a very honorable and potentially meaningful profession. So
I agree. It's quite monastic in its way. You wake up early. You do something honest with your hands.
Yeah, an investment.
Right. But the other side of that is I've spent so many years working so hard on languages, and it's hard for me to even explain this to like my own mother or my own relatives or friends. I have to say to people, so like I said to my mother recently, look, you have never worked on something as hard as I worked on learning Chinese. And I worked way harder on Pali and Cambodian and Laotian and these other languages than I worked on Chinese. But it's like there's this long process of working on languages and also history and politics. And I want this to be meaningful in my life, in the present and in the future, in some way. So I mean, I think that is the sincere answer to the question you're asking. And the other footnote just is I've alluded to the fact I've visited many universities and spoken to many professors. I wish I could tell you I have a bunch of options. I wish I could tell you I have a bunch, positive, negative, or in between. But I really don't. My options, my alternatives are limited to zero. So I feel like I've already looked at everything in Taiwan, in Thailand, also for example, in Europe. I've talked to all the universities in Germany and France, as well as United Kingdom, as well as England, and of course Canada. And within the U.S., I haven't talked to everybody because financially, many of the American universities are not an option. Some of the American universities, $50,000 a year, and as we both looked, there's no real employment value to the degree, and there's often no language training value. Also, many of the American universities is $50,000 a year, and I wouldn't even learn anything with language. With University of the West, one of my hopes was just being there, being in a suburb of LA where 40% of people are Chinese and where the students speak Chinese. I'd get to work on Chinese every day. I'd be in a Chinese language environment, or have some Chinese speaking friends or something. Although I'm not, having now been to University of the West, there's no Chinese language club, I notice. They don't have a Chinese language program. They're not set up in that way. And, some of the schools in Taiwan are, where whether or not your degree is in Chinese, where they're set up to help you improve your Chinese. So yeah, that was one of the positive hopes about U.S. was that I could live in a Chinese language, in a place where I'm getting that education all the time, regardless of my formal credentials.
Yeah, despite the heavily East Asian demographics in the San Gabriel Valley in general, my feeling is that this is a largely segregated area, and the people kind of are working in their own little circles, and you would hardly there are a lot of Chinese restaurants, but I doubt those are very conducive place to hone your linguistic skill.
Right.
And most Asian students on campus, as far as I can tell, they are mainland Chinese here to study MBA, and I hate to generalize or to cast them into stereotypes, but many of them were primarily driven by hedonistic concerns. They're hitting local pub scenes, karaoke, and doing their own things. I'm not sure if you will find this to be a thriving ground of intellectual exchange or linguistic immersion.
Right. And I really I appreciate you saying that. Obviously, I think you and I have a lot in common, actually. But that's often I often have to emphasize to people the fact that somebody is Chinese doesn't mean they're motivated to be my Chinese teacher or my partner or anything else, or talk to me about the history of slavery in China or something, whatever I have to be doing research on. So no, and I've seen that again and again also with Laos, Cambodia, with other languages and cultures I've worked on. Yeah. Well, look, I'll ask you. So I mentioned this as a parallelism. I have a Chinese professor in Canada, and I asked him. He does really like me. He's very positive. He likes my writing. And I said to him one day, well, what do you think about me getting a master's degree, with you? Basically you as my supervisor in one of these departments. And there was a silence. And then he answered, he said, every one of my graduate students, I track their career after they leave. And he said, to date, not a single one has found employment, full-time employment. So obviously he didn't mean working at a restaurant, but he meant some kind of, whatever standard he had of a decent job. And I remember that was, he's culturally Chinese. He's, born and raised in China. So his manner of speaking is a little bit more wooden, but I got the message. You know what I mean? He really meant this. So,
you couldn't believe how many students I actually steered away from pursuing this path. And so they were steered into, the healthcare professions, into technology-related professions and so forth. I know this is kind of like, in a way, self-sabotaging in that...
it's being honest. It's not...
That revenues are dependent on having many students, but in good conscience, I cannot withhold this very vital piece of information from any prospective student.
Right.
This is how dire it is. It's not just dire, it's hopeless.
Right.
Yeah. So... if I'm understanding you correctly, you are at the same time pursuing some type of a vocational training.
Yes, that's right.
US is...
So that may give me the luxury to get a PhD. I mean, again, I was thinking I could end up pursuing a PhD in something like history, but that also never earns any income.
Yeah.
I just say, I was thinking that maybe if I can be reasonably successful in this kind of vocational training, this kind of setup, that then,
Have you looked into these Southeast Asian language program at UCLA? They have a very robust program where Laotian, Vietnamese, Cambodian, and so forth are being taught. By the way,
I probably did maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago or something.
Okay,
but
it's probably more nowadays than 10 years ago. So I would be surprised if they are looking.
But look, I say again, I'm a Canadian citizen. So in terms of the guanxi and the cost, because remember, for most American citizens, like people pay $50,000 a year to get a degree in political science. So my first degree is in political science in the United States. And the main value of that is the informal connection to sources of employment. So they literally one of the programs like, oh, you'll get to meet Madeleine Albright. Great. For me, that's useless. Now, I don't know. For an American citizen, maybe there's some value in that kind of degree at UCLA. Of course, I'm skeptical. But, the cost-benefit ratio compared to, if you take $50,000 to Laos or Cambodia, you're a rich man. You can live for you can open a hotel or something. I mean, it's ridiculous, the difference in cost. So I just say, but as a Canadian, I do face kind of special disadvantages that way. And that's part of what led me to learning Chinese. Chinese wasn't my first choice. It was my last choice. But now, Chinese now is my main language of scholarship and conversation. I wake up every morning and practice reading and writing Chinese. I'm not fluent because I've only been doing it for so many years.
Instead of looking into baking as a way of supporting yourself, have you thought about becoming a Chinese teacher or,
I have, but that's a field that's dominated by people who are born Chinese and speak Chinese as their first language.
I'm not sure about that. The experience I had in Taiwan was that they're always looking for a token white man, so to speak.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well,
in either the language school or cram school or college, wherever. Language.
But you're not talking about teaching English. You're talking about teaching Chinese, though, because these are two very different things.
I'm talking about teaching Chinese. Right. Even Chinese, it's a glorious thing to have a Caucasian who is at least bilingual. In your case, of course, it's not just bilingual, but it might be.
Yeah, it's a very hard road for me to get on. I started learning Chinese at age 35 or 36. I forget.
Yeah, I see.
I'm not a white guy who started learning Chinese at age 18 or age 16.
So you're more comfortable with
No. But let me just finish. The actual diploma in question, NTNU in Taiwan gives that diploma, and there's also I have done all the research on this, and there's one university in the south which is called Wenzhou Ursuline Language University.
I know.
Those are the two in Taiwan that give that training. So I have done the research on that. And, honestly, it would be a very long, very expensive path for me to get on that leads to very uncertain, very low-wage employment, even compared to teaching ESL. And, I mean, what you say is true. There is some work for that. I do think I have a lot to offer as an as a Chinese language teacher, because my approach to language, my understanding of what a Westerner needs to know and how to teach language is very different from someone who speaks as their first language. I do think I have some advantages there. But in terms of earning a living and the long, narrow path to that form of employment, in terms of the credentials you can get, the number of years, the amount of money to be spent, it's very tough. And this is the thing I'd note. When you go to NTU, because I've gone and talked to those people, almost all of the students doing it are from countries that can't get native Chinese speakers as teachers. So, for example, there's work doing that stuff in Israel and Latin America and South America, because those are the countries that aren't already full of Chinese immigrants working at minimum wage. But like here in Los Angeles, you really think I could earn a living being a Chinese teacher? There's a huge number of Chinese people who already speak the language.
Not in LA.
Well. Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, but I got to survive now. I mean, I just say this is, now I'm not looking at such a remote possibility.
That you may not necessarily have, but would it be safe to say that the primary attraction of our school lies in the fact that it offers some kind of scholarships, so you can subsist at the
That's a totally good question, but I mean, look. So I'd say three things. One, this is before I came here, because I talked about this with my girlfriend and with my mom. Like, why am I going to LA to visit this university? Number one was the idea of being in a university where nonprofit work was appreciated. Like, because even the bakery, it may be a nonprofit. You know what I mean? I may do that as a charity. Obviously, you earn a salary from a charity. That may become a nonprofit mission for me. And a lot of my own interests in life in terms of charity and what have you. I didn't go to Cambodia to get rich, are related to nonprofit and charity work. So that was appealing. The idea of being a university where nonprofit and charity work is a big deal. Being at a university where my background as a scholar of Buddhism is appreciated or at least understood, you know what I mean? Because believe me, I can be in all kinds of contexts where people just look at me like, what? Who are you? You're from where? Or even, like, I've been in many contexts with the fact that I used to live in Cambodia is just regarded negatively. Like, people just think I'm a bad person because I used to live in Cambodia, as opposed to being in a place where people would just be a little bit positive about that or open, like, oh, isn't that interesting? You studied Buddhism in Cambodia and Laos, just responding a little bit positive to that. And then the third thing, as I already mentioned, was the prospect of doing language work, constantly or consistently, of raising the level I have in Chinese. But I mean, I could go back to Pali. I really was a Pali scholar for many years, and I'm not boasting to you. I've met most of the people who have PhDs in Pali. I met them face to face. I met the great Pali scholars. I met Jacqueline Filiozat. I met Richard Gombrich. I met the new generation coming up, and of course I've read their work and stuff. And I really was. I had the potential to be one of the greatest scholars in that field, or the greatest, partly because my competition is very humble. The quality of scholarship and the honesty of scholarship is really low in the 21st century. It was better 200 years ago or 150 years ago, but be that as it may, I did all that work. So yes, you could say there might be the temptation to try to some extent, again, even if it's not reviving my ability in Pali, to get some value out of that, now and in the future of my life. So that's very appealing. And I've got to say, so, yes, for me in my position today, and given the lack of other options open to me, it's the idea of getting a PhD in something like, Buddhist philosophy, whatever you call it, is still appealing and interesting. I prefer, frankly, to have a degree that maybe was called Asian Studies or something like that. But yes, I am open to that, and I am, on some level still positive about it. And, for other people, I mean, look, the other thing is you can look at this too as, like, I've already done all this work and research. And, okay, I mentioned one brief anecdote. I talked to a professor at a university in Canada that has a PhD in Buddhist Studies program. And, I was talking to him. He was very positive. We had maybe 4 emails back and forth. And then I said to him very casually that I was thinking about opening a bakery, within the same period of time, like getting a PhD. A PhD can take years and years. And he immediately became hostile and negative and kind of like hung up the phone. It was an email conversation. But he wrote back really angrily saying, no, forget it. I won't consider you as a PhD student here at all if you're thinking about running a business on the side. And I remember that's mind-blowing because I've been friends with so many people while they were getting their PhDs, including my ex-wife, while she was my wife, while she was getting a PhD. And they had a lot of time on their hands. And it's like, don't these people realize I'd be coming to this already with such a high level of preparation? Like, in some ways, it is cashing in on the investment of time I put into this area of studies for a period of over 10 years already. It would not be as hard for me. And of course, maybe I could do even more productive research, maybe more positive stuff come out of it. But I'm not in the situation of a normal person who just finished a BA and is looking to enter an MA in Buddhism.
I really have a great deal of sympathy for the this quandary that you're in.
Yeah.
But why don't you think that these three reasons you listed cannot be met by a place like UCLA? I imagine that a place like that would meet your needs much more than our school can possibly do. And you end up with a PhD from a pedigree program, and in the often chance that you do return to Canada, you can become a full-time professor.
Right.
I hate to, badmouth my own school.
I understand. Yeah.
But getting a PhD from our program would amount to almost nothing.
Yeah.
In terms of employability.
Yeah.
Why not spend the same amount of time and energy, somewhere else? This is.
Yeah. I'll tell you honestly, after I went to the campus, I was thinking maybe I should go back to Taiwan for that reason. But I doubt it would be any university.
Why not University of Toronto? Why not,
Well, look, I've been doing this for
University of Columbia.
Right, but I've been doing this for more than 15 years, so I know all the specific professors there. There isn't one professor at any of those universities who will even have a Skype conversation with me or phone conversation with me like you are now. So I could get into the specifics. University of Toronto, I know exactly the professors involved. I have since the year 2001. So however many years we're up to now, 17 years. I know the situation of that university. And, when you look at it institution by institution, many of these institutions have intentionally closed the door in my face. Some are just not interested in opening the door. And in some cases, there are those factors that I mentioned that as a Canadian, what's already absurdly expensive in the United States is even more expensive. And you're looking at a path that isn't worth getting on from that perspective. Sorry.
Isn't it the case that Canadian employments are first and foremost reserved for Canadian citizens?
Yeah. So, that's now forbidden under NAFTA. The free trade agreement with the United States actually makes that illegal.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So preferential hire. Yeah, but it is still true that there is preference for hiring a Canadian citizen. It is absolutely true that there is some preference, and that's why I alluded to that earlier when I said as a Canadian I have disadvantages, but there's also kind of a smaller market of competition. They very often do want to hire a Canadian candidate. Yeah, but they can't be racist, so to speak, against American citizens as openly as they were in, say, the 1970s or whatever. Yeah. So that's a change in Canadian institutional practice. And we do have, in Canada, you can be in departments where none of the professors are Canadian. It's now very common where everyone's a foreigner in a Canadian academic department. Especially in Asian studies, obviously. Yeah. Right.
And, once again, how should I put this? Of course, this would be kind of deigning yourself. Okay, so I'm not suggesting somehow that you are only eligible for this level of work. Yeah. But realistically speaking, America right now has a voracious appetite for healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
Right? Typically, that line of work would require, say, 2 years worth of training, 1 year's worth of training. Like in 2 years, as say, for example, as a registered nurse, you'd be making upwards of $70,000-$80,000 US per year.
Yeah.
And there's such a tremendous demand that they're almost indiscriminate when it comes to citizenship, when it comes to whatever the case might be, temperament, connections. If you got the certificate, you get the job right away, even before you're done your work. Okay, I understand that you wanted to be true to your passion. It's either baking or Buddhist studies.
Well, no, I think, look, you ask a good question. Obviously, I've looked at many jobs like that, including becoming a police officer, including joining the military. I mean, I've looked at, many people have said the same characteristics that make me a good scholar of Buddhism would make me a good police officer. And I'm not joking when I say that. Both kind of focus, attention to detail, equanimity, detachment, a lot of these things. And I'm a forceful but not violent personality. Anyway, I have looked at those things, but I think for me the bottom line is you're looking for a job that's compatible with being a real intellectual. And, baking, it's not that baking is my great passion in life. I feel it's ethically positive and morally positive. I'm vegan. I'm not just vegetarian, I'm vegan. And I know some Buddhists are vegetarian somewhere on the spectrum, but I'm fully vegan. So the baking connects positively to that and ideas I have about ecology and ethics. But also the nature of baking as a repetitive manual labor. There are creative challenges in coming up with a recipe, but then once you've got that recipe, you make it 1,000 times. I think that really is compatible with studying languages and teaching languages and studying history and politics and being an intellectual. And I do not think that the type of, emotionally and mentally exhausting work of, say, being a caretaker for the elderly as a nurse or something.
Well, actually,
but those kinds of biomedical degrees, I don't see the same way. So I think there are various reasons, but yeah, that would be my answer to that question.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know what else to tell you.
No, I mean, thank you for your concern. I mean, thank you for your help. It's a surreal conversation to have, but I think it's a necessary one.
Once again, I know I might not be successful in dissuading you.
Right. Well, look, I hope I have your current email. I'm using the Moon in Hands email, so
that's supposed to be the correct one.
Well, maybe I'm going to spam because that's where I sent
one word with the S at the end.
Yep.
At Gmail, right?
Yep. That's what I've been sending to. So I may be blocked. You may have blocked me 10 years ago. It's quite possible, and, or I may be going to spam. But yeah, that's what I'm into. But I mean.
I can always check. Yeah.
I guess I'll go back and re-examine some of the options in Taiwan. Because, I mean, for me, I would say, Buddhism is one of my interests. But I'd say what I've always been looking for is a combination of research and humanitarian work, kind of research type stuff, and then making the world a better place type stuff. And, I've tried to do that in Cambodia. I tried to do that in Laos. But now it's a really weird situation because I was hoping Chinese as a language would open a lot of doors for me. And it hasn't. It really hasn't. I'm not in a better situation now with Chinese than I was when I was studying obscure languages like Pali and Laotian.
Well, I suspect that, in order to have Chinese open doors for you, you would have to be very focused in terms of, chasing down a certain specific goals. Rather than just, like being generically proficient in multiple languages, right? You have to pick up pedagogy, for example, right? You have to cultivate, guanxi, with the right people and feel and so forth.
Well, right. But with that having been said, I'm vastly overqualified compared to the normal person who applies to enter an MA program. And that's really what we're talking about is why can't I get a master's degree somewhere? So what you say is reasonable, but in that context, there should be MA options for me. Yeah.
If I haven't made this clear in the past, of course you're more than welcome to give a shot, right? And I have no doubt you'll get in. It's just that.
Right. I completely understand. The question is what happens next, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And also, actually, even before then, right, in the process of getting to what comes next, you might not be happy.
Yep.
Program. Yeah.
So. Well, I understand. And, as I say, I'd been to a lot of the Buddhist universities in Taiwan. I was expecting Silai to be, similar to that. And boy, walking into the dining hall, walking into the canteen and seeing hamburgers for sale, I was thought, wow, this is not really what I was expecting to be the study environment here, So I commented to the guy giving me the tour. I said, at Silai Temple.
We're the most unimpressive looking campus within all of Fo Guangsan's consortium.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much for your time. If we can stay in touch by email, I'd appreciate that. I mean, I think you. I will text message you my email, but it's basically the same as my name, so it's
Okay.
Yeah.
Most of our graduate students who are in a hard place financially speaking, their situation is aggravated as a result of pursuing a PhD degree.
Right.
So it does improve over time. So
I agree. Anecdotally, that's really what I've seen. I agree. It's a road to bleak poverty. I agree. Yeah.
So if you want to ameliorate your situation, this might not be the path that you want to pursue. So that
Well, I agree. I think the basis of if I do become a student at your university, I think it would have to be that for other reasons I'm committed to living in Los Angeles, and maybe I'm committed to working in a bakery here, or running a bakery, or owning a small bread factory or something. There's something like that. I'm involved with vegan activism or some other kind of positive activism in LA. And then you say, okay, can this be compatible with also, pursuing something in Asian studies, Asian languages, Buddhism? Can I at the same time?
Well,
I think it would be that kind of argument. Yeah.
I hope you've done ample field research in that front. My understanding is that there are a lot of ethnic establishments and a lot of vegetarian restaurants, at least in St. Gabriel Valley.
Yes.
And you might be looking at some pretty steep competition, and there are a lot of Asians coming in with capitals. They're able to start things in the right way. Whereas I imagine that
that's the way capitalism works. I mean, that's the way to have a successful business is build it where people are already busy. If you want to, you can put a bakery in the middle of the desert, or you could put it in the middle of northern Michigan State. But no, being where there are already 10 other bakeries is almost always the most successful place to open the 11th bakery.
Yeah.
Not joking. Yeah. So, yeah. No, but I'm just describing the context in which that's possible. But yeah, I mean, I assume you're someone who might be interested to hear about what I now learn. I could talk to UCLA. I just really doubt it. Because again, you have to look at the specific professors involved. When the United States, it's very unlikely. I can say there's almost a 0% chance anything like that would work out for me. But I mean,
I'm not so sure about that. I actually find that a rather surprising statement.
Right, but that is my experience for more than 15 years. And remember, I have to talk to a professor, and it has to be a professor who looks at my resume or looks at my articles and says, yes, we're interested. So I mean, you asked about UBC, University of British Columbia. I approached them with a totally broad mandate, like not wanting to narrowly focus on Theravada Buddhism or something, saying, look, this is my background, I can do kind of almost anything. And their response was, in effect, look, we do nothing but 18th century Japanese poetry and certain centuries of Chinese poetry, and if that's not what you do,
I'm not sure that that's the case with places like UCLA or USC or any of the big name schools. And in fact, if you succeed in getting into one of these programs, there's good likelihood that you're going to get full scholarship. You're going to get
but that's if they like me. I mean, it's very prejudicial. I mean, this is really based on human prejudice. And Buddhism is a highly bigoted religion. There were Mahayana Buddhists who regarded me as the devil when I was involved with Theravada Buddhism. I mean, there's real hatred and rancor and racism, and I mean, it's a deeply divisive, religious mentality field. I've been through peer review where my article was rejected because I corrected an error in the Pali Text Society dictionary. That dictionary isn't even written by Buddhist monks. The dictionary written by Rhys Davids in England, by a white man who was not a monk. And I was told it was religiously offensive that I would find fault with the dictionary, and therefore my article couldn't be published. Professors hate me for religious reasons and reject me for religious reasons. And that's not surprising. It'd be the same if I were a scholar of Judaism or a scholar of Islam.
I'm not saying that there is no prejudices or biases.
Sure, but let's be honest. A professor of Nichiren Buddhism will never invite me in. A professor of Zen Buddhism will never invite me in. A professor of Tibetan Buddhism will never invite me in. I once got an invitation to get a PhD at Stanford if I drop everything I was doing and start learning Tibetan. How's that for a trade-off? I don't want to learn Tibetan. I don't respect Tibetan Buddhism. I don't. I don't want a whole new career in Tibet. So, like, you really think for a minute about who is the establishment. And that's just on the Buddhism side. Then you can look at the Asian studies, Asian politics side. And again, there were all these categories that exclude me. The largest one in Asian studies just being the people who only do literature, only do poetry. Yeah. So it is interesting. You can tell I'm not complaining. I'm just sharing this with you. But no, it's easy to say there must be an opportunity somewhere. But I'm telling you honestly, there isn't. The reason I'm talking to you, the reason I just spent thousands of dollars, whatever, over $1,000 coming to LA to visit your campus, is that there are no better options for me anywhere.
Look, so just a few minutes ago, you reminded me of the possibility that maybe 10 years ago I blocked you.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
now. All right. Give me 1 second here. Yeah. So in complete candor, and I say this because I really think that people change over time, and
sure.
As a result of becoming more seasoned and having had more life experience and so forth, we might tempered our edges over time and so on and so forth. And so my experience with different universities, with different Buddhist studies programs, and I think it's fair to say that this is probably shared by many of my senpais, by my colleagues and so forth, is that universities in general are places that are as devoid of prejudices as you can find anywhere else. Okay, so I'm not saying there is none. I'm saying compared to possibly everywhere else in the world, these are probably the most progressive, the most liberal, open-minded places one can find. And so if you consistently encounter difficulty with professors, I seriously doubt that it's because you lack qualifications or that they insisted you pursue a ultra specialized study. It might have to do with our style of approaching them. It might have to do with the way that we present our own case. It may be that substantively speaking, you are brilliant, you're stellar, but when it comes to packaging yourself, when it comes to, and look, I'm not saying this because somehow I detected any, quote unquote excesses, on your part at this given moment, from what has transpired in the past 2 days or so. This is based on very vague memory that I have about our past exchanges, like long time ago. Okay, and so, and these professors are human beings, and they might find you, hot-headed.
Can I just ask, do you think people in other disciplines make the kind of excuses you're making? Because I've heard these excuses in Buddhist studies all my life. Do you think honestly, if we were talking about medical school, if we were talking about architecture, if we were talking, wait a minute, two more examples, Latin and Greek. If I had studied ancient Greek, do you think I'd have to tolerate this kind of horse shit from you or from Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard or the small universities in Canada or UBC?
Look, I saw.
Because I've heard this all my life. All my life I've had to hear this. I know you have good intentions. I know you do. But in response, I have to ask you, live up to a higher standard. Live up to the standard you imagine they take for granted in Latin and Greek. Shouldn't it be possible for someone to be a legitimate scholar of Latin or Greek and proceed on that basis? Because what you're describing to me, I've heard these excuses before, and I don't think they'd fly in other fields. I think they perceived it as deeply immoral, the set of excuses you're presenting in other fields.
Yeah, I really don't think that what I said is immoral or in any ways excuses or anything like that, and it doesn't deserve this kind of response. And look, Aizol.
Okay, so or
leave it for whatever it's worth. You don't find this helpful, that's fine.
I understand. But do you want to ask me a question? Is something you think you misunderstand in my response?
No, I'm not asking a question. I'm not asking a question. Yeah, I don't think that the things that I have suggested are immoral. or excuses, and that in terms of succeeding either as a graduate student or as an academician, one cultivates a full spectrum of qualities, which include patience and giving people the benefit of the doubt, and not reflexively ascribing the worst type of intention to people. So, look, I don't. If you don't find this line of conversation helpful, we can drop this issue. Okay, so
but look, why don't you look? Maybe I've misunderstood you. Why don't you summarize for me what your point is? Because what you claimed was that the
calm down for 1 second and look at the way you're responding to what I have said. Have you really detected any enmity on my part?
No, none whatsoever.
Disrespect on my part?
None whatsoever, and I don't claim anything of that sort.
Yeah.
Right.
So to describe what I described as horseshit or immoral or excuses.
So what is it I'm claiming is immoral, though? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, you are saying that there are these deeply seated prejudices and biases,
right.
Somehow just inexplicably lodged.
You think that's inexplicable? You think any of the examples I gave were not things I've encountered in real life? Do you think I'm lying to you?
No. I am saying that you perceive it as inexplicable.
I didn't say that at all. I think it's totally reasonable. I think you're disregarding. I'm talking about real world situations I know. I don't think it's unreasonable that someone who's devoted their life I don't think it's unreasonable that someone who devoted their life to Tibetan Buddhism only wants to work with other people who study Tibetan Buddhism. I don't think that's unreasonable. But I'm saying to you, sorry, I'm going to finish my sentence. I didn't say it's unreasonable. I just said that is the type of situation that excludes me. It's totally rational. If you had a department devoted to French literature and I want to study Spanish literature, naturally they're not going to want me as a student. You get that kind of thing in Asian studies and in Buddhism. You get people who are committed both on a language level and historical level.
There's no reason to be angry, Aizol. I am not saying somehow what you described is untrue. Okay, I'm saying that from my experience that hasn't been the case, right? So I'm using.
And I've got more than 15 years of experience, and I think there's nothing unreasonable what I said, and it is true. Everything I've told you is true, Professor. And I think just intuitively it should be clear to you that there's a lot of truth to that a department that's devoted to Tibetan studies or any other field like that.
I disagree that somehow Buddha studies as a field is somehow less moral than people in the field of medicine or in Greek or in Latin.
Oh, okay. So why do you think I said that? Let's just be clear. Why do you think I said that?
It's okay.
So I'll tell you. It's because you're judging people on matters of belief that would not be judged in that way in a field like ancient Greek.
I'm not judging you.
No, I know, William. I was answering the question in reference to other institutions I've dealt with, in reference to this broad. Do you actually misunderstand me? I mean, when I say you in that sentence, sorry, I could have said one. That would be somewhat antiquated English.
Yeah. Look,
So, William, you're not capable of having this conversation. Somebody tells you in a totally down-to-earth way, and I didn't ascribe any bad motives to anyone. Yes, there are departments that are, for example, devoted to Tibetan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism. Someone who's devoted their whole life to Japanese, I don't think it's unreasonable they want to exclude me. And you've said that's not your experience. So a professor who just does Japanese Buddhism and says to me honestly he doesn't want me as a graduate student, I completely understand that. Why do you find that shocking? I don't find that surprising at all. You say it's not your experience.
No.
So we agree. So I'm being reasonable and reporting you something I've experienced over 15 years.
You said that somehow our field is just inherently prejudicial, that Buddhism is somehow the most prejudicial.
Did I say that? So what did I actually say? No, I said I don't think the issues are surprising at all compared to what I would encounter as a scholar of Judaism or Islam or many other things. I think there are similar. So you did actually disregard a lot of what I said. And I'm comparing it to the experience I've had in political science, in Asian studies, and in many other disciplines. Yeah, sure. Those are real issues.
Okay. Actually, I've said my piece, Aizol. You're welcome to take whatever it's, that you find helpful or not helpful, or leave whatever it's unhelpful. So I have to get going, Aizol, really. So this is not the line of inquiry or the kind of conversation I'd like to carry on further. Okay, best of luck to you, and let me know if there are things I can do with regards to answering your questions about our program. Otherwise,
okay, Professor, I really think if you listened back to a recording of this conversation afterwards, you'd have to reflect that what I've said to you.
That if you take a minute to look at the way that you respond to situations, the way you participate in conversations, and so forth.
Right, it's my fault. Well, right? Why not say what you really mean?
We should all own up our own responsibility.
Okay, so what do you want to talk about that with me? No, you want to say that and hang up the phone. No. Okay.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Well, what kind of person does that make you, Professor?
Okay, impatient one. All right, a busy one. Actually, I have to go. Aizol, thank you.
Okay, I've recorded the conversation. I'm going to post it on my YouTube channel. You can hear it back, and you can reflect on the fact, Professor. I think you live in a bubble where you think this has been a tremendously challenging conversation for you, but really, someone in another field like ancient Greek, Rachel, and Latin, this would not be so provocative a conversation. This would not be such a challenge for you to deal with. The level of challenge I've brought to this conversation, it really shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be that hard for you to deal with this level of challenge, Professor. I hope in the future